Man thought the eldritch was unknowable. They never imagined that it could think the same of them, or that peering into the abyss went both ways. The boundary between the mortal and the divine, the human and the otherworldly, was not a one-way mirror. It was a threshold, and crossing it came with consequences neither side could fully predict. Nayitch was foulblood. In his veins ran the power of the ancients and the above, far out of the reach of ordinary men. But not out of reach forever. All it had taken was him, a catalyst, a bridge between worlds, to complete the ritual. Years of research, of wondering and hoping, had led to this moment. A drought with no known source had been a powerful motivator, but it was more than that. It was the thirst for knowledge, for power, for understanding. And now, standing at the central altar of the sathinat, Nayitch felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. The sathinat was a place where forbidden gods were studied, where the knowledge of the divine and the mortal met. It was here, in this grand amphitheater, that Nayitch and his fellow scholars would attempt to summon Ragathar, an entity of the deep, a being of water and mystery. The blackened water that ran down the walls in rivulets, collected from the strange dark streams where the watermen gathered, was a testament to their dedication. The chandelier above, designed to resemble an intricate maze of coral, dripped with the otherworldly fluid, its droplets falling into the amphitheater below. The gallery seats were filled with the Emperor's soldiers, their armor glinting in the dim light. Emperor Harlan Audlai himself sat in the highest chair, his scarred visage handsome and imposing. He was dressed in the dark blues and golds of the Sathinati, a gesture of respect, and a reminder of the weight he placed on this endeavor. The Empire's rivers were drying up, and though the threat was still distant for the larger territories, Harlan was not a man to wait for disaster to strike. "Go on, then, master scholars," the Emperor said, his voice calm but commanding. "Perform this deed, and I will grant the promised funds and more." Nayitch smiled. They had performed a minor calling before, a test to ensure Ragathar's interest. Now they would see if the entity would answer their plea. "Remember," Nayitch said to his fellow scholars, his voice low, "only I speak to the old beast." The ritual began. The offerings were laid out, the watermen's tongues spoken, the prostrations made. The scholars called upon the materials and knowledge they had gathered, easing their way into the between, the liminal space where the mortal world gave way to the divine. It was a dangerous place, one they had learned to navigate with caution. To cross over fully was to risk being lost forever, as 3 of their kind had been. But to enter the between, to stand at the threshold, was to invite the attention of the gods. The amphitheater shifted, the air growing heavy with the scent of something stranger than sea salt. The mortal world faded, replaced by an expansive sea that stretched out before them, its dark waters lapping at the edges of the amphitheater without wetting a single tile. The onlookers, the Emperor's elite guard, moved away from the water, their faces pale beneath their masks. Nayitch and his scholars covered their faces as well, the masks allowing them to breathe in the choking, cloying air. And then something emerged from the water. It was small, round, and almost endearing in its appearance. A pearl-like creature with a soft, glowing body and too many eyes. It floated in a clam-like shell, its form bobbing gently on the surface of the dark water. The room trembled with anticipation, the chandelier above dripping its otherworldly fluids into the sea below. "A mere babe," someone whispered, their voice trembling with awe. Nayitch knelt, bowing his head. Everyone else followed suit, even the Emperor. Nayitch spoke in the old tongue, his words clumsy but earnest. "Dearest Ragathar, you come?" He'd call. The creature turned toward him, its many eyes blinking slowly. When it spoke, its voice was gentle and melodic, yet alien in a way that sent shivers down the spine. "Friends, they come to me truly." Almost. Nayitch hesitated, then pressed on. "We ask for power over water. You have this." The creature tilted its head, or rather its body, in a gesture that might have been curiosity. "Much, yes. You want water?" Nayitch nodded, his heart pounding. "We have prepared offerings. We ask, with grace, for your aid." Ragathar paused, the silence stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Then it spoke again. "Will you play a game?" Nayitch blinked, caught off guard. "If it is possible." The creature's response was an image, projected directly into Nayitch's mind. It was a board game, one he had played just hours before to prepare for this moment. Ragathar had shown a fondness for such games in their previous interactions, and now it seemed the entity wanted to play. And so they played. For hours, Nayitch and Ragathar engaged in a series of games, the creature's movements slow and deliberate, its victories few but meaningful. The Emperor and his men watched in silence, their confusion growing with each passing hour. But Nayitch understood. This was not just a game. It was a test, a negotiation, a bridge between worlds. When the final game ended, Ragathar tilted its body toward Nayitch. "You have not asked your boon." Nayitch took a deep breath, then spoke in his own tongue. "Our water suffers. If it is not helped, we will starve. We hoped you would be willing to aid us." Ragathar's mouth opened, revealing black needle teeth and a tongue that was not made of flesh. "Anything for a friend." The cups placed around the room, once empty, began to fill with pure, clear water. The drought was over. The empire was saved. The empire flourished. The rivers, once dry and lifeless, now flowed with water so pure it seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. The drought was over, and the people rejoiced. But for Nayitch and the Sathinat, the work was far from finished. Ragathar had become a constant presence in their lives, a bridge between the mortal world and the divine. The creature's gentle nature and insatiable curiosity made it an invaluable ally, but it also posed challenges that none of them had anticipated. Ragathar's influence grew. The creature, once confined to the between, began to manifest more fully in the mortal world. Its form shifted and evolved, becoming more humanoid yet retaining its otherworldly essence. It learned from the scholars, mimicking their speech and gestures, adopting their customs and games. But it also brought with it pieces of its own world, strange, alien things that defied explanation. The blackened water that had once been a tool of the ritual now flowed freely in certain places, its properties both miraculous and dangerous. Nayitch found himself torn. He had sought to save his people, to bring water to a dying land. But in doing so, he had opened a door that could not be closed. The Emperor, once grateful, now watched with a wary eye. The Sathinat, once a place of learning and discovery, had become a hub of power and fear. And Ragathar, once a distant entity, had become a friend, a child, even learning and growing in ways that no one could have predicted. Years passed. The Sathinat grew, its towers reaching higher into the sky, its influence spreading across the empire. Nayitch, now older and wearier, found himself at the center of it all. He played 2 games now. One with men who clamored for more power and more knowledge, and one with Ragathar, who continued to challenge him with games of intellect and strategy. The creature had grown not just in size but in understanding. It had children of its own, strange and beautiful beings that played in the gardens of the Sathinat, their laughter echoing through the halls. But the world outside was changing. The rivers, once pure, now carried a darkness that could not be ignored. Those who drank from them without caution withered or became something else. The empire's people, once grateful, now feared the water and the creature that had brought it. The emperor, once a supporter, now sought to control what he could not understand. One day, a decree arrived. It was written in the emperor's hand, its words cold and final. "With all respect for your institution's contributions, in the name of the Emperor Avril Adlai, we ask that you surrender your otherworlder weapons and yourselves to the empire's grace. For its stability, its health, and its love, the beast must be returned." Nayitch read the words with a heavy heart. He knew what they meant. The emperor's men would come, armed with weapons designed to hunt beings like Ragathar. They would not stop until the creature was captured or destroyed. And Nayitch, who had spent decades bridging the gap between worlds, would be forced to choose a side. He stood at the window of his tower, looking out over the town that had grown around the Sathinat. The streets were littered with offerings and monuments, the people bowing to a power they could not comprehend. Ragathar's children played in the gardens below, their forms shifting and shimmering in the sunlight. The creature itself sat at the table behind him, its many eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You've never come to regret your choices, have you, Ragathar?" Nayitch asked, his voice soft. The creature tilted its head, a gesture it had learned from him. "Not all of them. What of you?" Nayitch paused, his hand resting on the windowsill. "I regret letting myself seek more than I wanted. Even so." The sound of marching feet reached his ears. He turned, his heart sinking as he saw the Emperor's men approaching, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. They were led by a knight, his face hidden beneath a helmet, his sword drawn. Nayitch knew what they had come for. "I must tend to it," he said, his voice firm. Ragathar's mouth turned downward, a gesture of sadness it had learned from him. "Please, I just want to finish the game." Nayitch shook his head. "Not this time." He stepped away from the window, his movements slow but deliberate. He had grown older, his body no longer as strong as it once was, but his resolve had only hardened. He would protect Ragathar for as long as he could. He would protect the creature that had become a friend, a child, a part of his world. The knight and his men reached the gates of the Sathinat. Nayitch stood at the top of the stairs, his arms outstretched, his voice ringing out across the courtyard. "You will not take her." The knight paused, his sword raised. "Stand aside, foulblood. This is the Emperor's will." Nayitch shook his head. "The Emperor does not understand. She is not a beast to be caged or a weapon to be controlled. She is a being of water and mystery, a friend to those who would listen. I will not abandon her." The knight hesitated, his grip on his sword tightening. But before he could act, a sound filled the air, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The ground trembled, the waters of the river rising in response. Ragathar emerged from the Sathinat, her form shifting and expanding, her many eyes glowing with a light that was both beautiful and terrifying. The knight and his men stepped back, their faces pale. Ragathar's voice filled the air, gentle yet commanding. "I do not wish to harm you, but I will not be taken." Nayitch stood at her side, his heart swelling with pride. The creature he had summoned, the being he had come to love, had grown into something more than he could have imagined. She was not just a god or a beast. She was a part of the world, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The knight lowered his sword, his men following suit. They retreated, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Nayitch watched them go, his hand resting on Ragathar's side. The creature turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. Nayitch smiled, his heart heavy but full. "Always."